Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Betsy Chassie. I am one of the mouthy people on the Conscious Creators Network. I am a filmmaker and a storyteller and an author, and I'm really grateful that you're all here. If you haven't already, I think most of you are, but if you aren't, please join the Creators Network. We're almost 2,000 people strong all over the world. We have members in just about every country at this point. And the platform is a great place to collaborate, connect, support, inspire, share your work, what you're up to, what you're creating. It's a network filled with filmmakers, storytellers, writers, musicians, artists, visual artists. And we're all working towards creating conscious media. And that's why it's cool to have Mark Allan Kaplan as one of our mentors and guides on learning how to create actual conscious media as opposed to the idea of conscious media, which, you know, to me, what I appreciate about your work, Mark, is something I've always been telling people is there's a difference between making a film or a documentary that tells why I should be conscious or why I should meditate or why I should do what I'm doing because I, as the filmmaker, know better than you because I'm smart and now I'm conscious and now I'm going to tell you how to be conscious, versus what Mark is really talking about and why we're doing these movie meetups is the idea of integrating the ideas of consciousness and conscious raising content into your film, which is, to me, a skill and an important one if we're going to really have an impact and really do the things that we say that we want to do, which is to raise the consciousness of the planet. So it starts with me, and I'm always really interested in what you have to say, Mark, because it reminds me as a storyteller or a filmmaker, it gives me a tool to go, oh, I can do, instead of that speech or that thing, I'll do this thing instead, or they'll take the camera this way. And it really makes, I'm really having an impact. I'm really raising the audience's consciousness. So we're going to talk today about the Star Wars saga. And I have a confession. Normally Trina sits here with you guys, but she's off taking her daughter for her birthday. And so she asked me to sit in today. And I'm going to tell you the truth. I think I've seen one Star Wars movie. So I'm going to be very quiet and listen. I know everyone's like, what? How is that even possible? I just, it's just not something that has grabbed me for whatever reason. My son is an avid fan, so I hear about it a lot, but I don't actually watch it. So Mark Allan Kaplan, thank you for putting on this movie of the month every month so we get some cool conversations, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks. Thank you, Betsy. Okay, everybody. Well, since this is about Star Wars, I have to start with the Force. What can I say? It's just, we have to invoke the Force here. So, which is one of the major contributions that this film has had on global culture, is the idea of the Force, which is at the heart of Star Wars in many ways, because it is in a way kind of what Lucas did is he integrated the concepts of Taoism with quantum theory. And he did that with Star Wars in many ways. Star Wars is in many ways one of the first hybridization forms of cinema. It created what we call the hybrid genre, which is integrating multiple elements of different genres into your own expressive form. No other work up until Star Wars that didn't exist. And after Star Wars, a lot of people started doing it. So the hybrid genre form started with Star Wars. So in a way, it was the smartphone of cinema. which I don't know if if we were talking about that before we started, so people may not know, but we were talking about how the smartphone is an integral device, and because it integrates all these forms, and then it helps us to begin to start that integrative kind of paradigm. And so that's what Star Wars did. And the Force, just, I mean, we often start with meditations and stuff like that. I like to start with what I call perceptual exercises. So we're exercising our consciousness. So if everyone could just get comfortable for a short little exercise in our perceptual field. And you could do it eyes open or closed. And what we want to do is just bring our perception to our bodies. And now just feel our bodies within the space we're in. So see if we could just feel into, all right, I'm in a room, and there's walls, there's ceilings, there's doors, I mean, there's objects, there's this technology that's here and all that, there's my body, and everything appears separate. And I want you to hold that this is an illusion according to quantum theory and many spiritual traditions. But what the illusion is that we think we're these separate forms. But at the molecular level, we're all molecules vibrating at different frequencies. And the space in between us and each other and the objects and the spaces, it's all an ocean of molecules vibrating around each other. And then we can go deeper to the atomic level. And so there's like, once we get away from the surface of things, there is this interconnectedness. And if you could bring your awareness to it, you can almost feel it. And even the air is molecules. So like if you want to just move your hand and imagine you're moving it through this liquid, gaseous, vibrating energy ocean. And just know that it's there. I mean, it really is there. And this is the Force. The foundation of it is that it is inside of us. It is all around us. We are one with it. It is one with us. Right? And the dark and the light side, that's the yin and the yang. And all of that is very scientific. You could look at it from this scientific perspective. So just holding that space, that here we are in the middle of this ocean of beingness, and we have these individual awareness fields and a collective field that we're in here that's part of a larger collective field, and fields upon fields. So this is just this shift in perspective. And a perspective, though, that's there. So there's where we begin. I want to tell us a story about Star Wars. When Star Wars came out, there was, well, first of all, I was there. I'm that old. I was in college, so I'm really that old. Anyway, so I went to USA Film School. So did the filmmaker of Star Wars, George Lucas. And it was like, at that time, Star Wars came out, it was like everybody was abuzz at school. It's like, wow, one of our alumni is like this film, this big film's coming out. So we all went to see it for the opening day at the Grauman's Chinese Theater. And we heard, oh man, it's going to be packed. So we went there the night before just to party, Well, there was already a line of people camped around the block. And it ended up being like 4 or 5 blocks by the time they opened the doors. And when we went in, and that first opening shot, it was like, it's hard to explain, but it was like a major, whoa, I've never seen anything like this before. And at the end, everyone applauded and all that. And I thought, oh, well, it's probably all of the film folks. That's why it's so big. And went home, on the news, it was like that was happening all over the country. Something was happening. I went home to visit my family, and my young nephew, who the previous week was playing battle scenes with G.I. Joe. That was his thing. And we took him to see Star Wars. And within a week, we were there at the table, and he was sitting there going like this. And like his mother said, would you have to go to the bathroom or something? And I was like, what are you doing? You cannot go to the bathroom, right? And he goes, no, Bobby, I'm trying to use the Force to pick up my fork. Now, just take a moment here. This is a child in their developmental period who, before this, was operating at a level of toy soldiers, shooting each other, pew, 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 all this. And the next week, he's experimenting with his own consciousness. That is not a small thing. That is a huge, huge thing. And now I'm here to tell you that it was on purpose, that Lucas intended to try to make that paradigm shift. He came to speak to us at our school. And of course, the room was packed. And he told us that when he was in school here, besides being a film student, he was also an anthropology student. And he started learning about anthropology, and he realized, looking around him, that American cinema had killed myth. And children were growing up without it, at least in the cinema and television. The heroes became the anti-hero. And he took it upon himself to try to change that. That was his intention. He said it to us back in right after that film came out. So here's he intended to shift the consciousness of an entire culture. And it was more successful than he ever imagined. So I think it's really important for all of us to understand that it's possible. Hello, we have another member here. A cinema cat. So when we think about, well, is it possible to consciously try to affect consciousness and do it on a big scale? Yeah, we have a case study. And let's remember, when that first Star Wars was made, it was not a big budget film.
I have a question quickly, Mark, just because I can't remember. What year did the first Star Wars come out?
1977.
Wow. Okay.
And that film, basically, by Lucas saying children are going through a developmental phase that requires myth for them to properly develop, and we don't have it, and I'm going to try to fix that. He was actually attempting to fix a hole in the evolution of the consciousness of society. And when we understand that, the whole thing kind of flowers. And I mean, we get it. You know, it's like even something like back then, what happened was, there's a great side story here that he told us, the inside scoop. He went to every studio at least once, some of them twice. They all turned it down, but they all said, we love it, but there's no way we can make it because our marketing department says it's not going to make money. Because up until that point, no science fiction film ever made a lot of money, except for Kubrick's 2001, which they consider an outlier. So they said, you know, it's not, you know. So it only took one executive at Fox who loved it so much and who loved Lucas's other films, believed in him, and put his own job on the line. He went to the board of trustees of the studio and said, you have my job, I'll walk out of here. I believe in it this much. So they gave him a low budget, you know, all right, go ahead, try it. And they had to make shift with everything. So we're talking about a low budget film here. They were trying to do, you know, so they experimented, they did a lot of stuff from their garages. So this is not like a big Hollywood movie that transformed the consciousness of culture across the world. This was a low budget, relatively low budget film by a filmmaker. This was just his third film out of film school. So it really kind of tells me that we can do this.
What's really cool, Mark, if I can just jump in, is that low budget created a set design that was kind of new old tech at the same time, like a lot of tubes and stuff like that. And yet now all of the budgets that followed it adhered to that, or had to adhere to that, in order to keep the story alive. So we had this great neo-archaic feel, which was just perfect for the film. I don't know if it would have happened that way.
Yes and no. Yeah, absolutely. That was part of it, but also it was part conscious, where he realized that to rebirth myth, you couldn't just go back and just repeat them because they were dead. The old myths, the Western was gone. It's like, you can't like rebirth the exact same thing. So that was what he tried to rebirth myth into the rational technological structure. So technology was rusted. It rusted. It wasn't this pristine. He made it more real, but he also made mythological figures from robots. So he took scientific structures and mythologized them. And if you notice, every Star Wars film starts with the same phrase. A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That, you start right there and it's like you're watching a myth. Our consciousness instantly goes, this is a myth. It's in the past, it's this grand story, right? So he's using myth, but he's integrating it with the current consciousness. He brought it up to where our consciousness was at. And he put in both rational industrial structures, like mythologizing the technologies, and also making them more real. They aged, they broke, all that stuff. And he also animated them with consciousness for the pluralistic structure of consciousness, that he gave them a subjective reality. So, so everything about it is a hybridization. It's an integration. So he took the elements of the old myths like the dogfighter flying scenes from the old war films, to the lightsaber, the saber swording of the swashbuckler, right? So, but he upgraded it, and he integrated it with not only technology, but with spirituality. So he brought in spirituality. Now here's a key here. We talk about the structures of consciousness here a lot, and the mythic structure of consciousness is before the rational and industrial structure in terms of when it came online for humanity. And the gap between those two stages is a big one, because part of the thing is you have to kill God in order to pass over, to go from mythic faith to hard science. And by enchanting this advanced scientific reality with this spirituality that he actually had a rational scientific foundation for, that he was going to tell us in the third trilogy that Disney dropped. They didn't do it, which I believe is one of their biggest mistakes, because with the final trilogy, they skipped a stage of development in the evolution of the Star Wars universe. They tried to jump from mythic structure of consciousness to pluralistic and skip the rational in terms of the story structures and, and all that. And that happened right in the middle of our new culture war. And because Star Wars had become a foundational myth in our society that several generations have been raised on, they didn't realize how embedded it was in our cultural field, that they didn't just have a film trilogy in their hands. They actually had, and still have, a cultural instrument in their hands. And that cultural instrument has a following in generations that in some ways know more about that story world than they do. And all of the fans have been projecting their own imaginations into it for over 30 years. So they didn't realize what they were tinkering with. They didn't know what they had. But anyway, so my point here, just to start this conversation, is holding it from this perspective. Star Wars shifted the paradigm in all dimensions of American cinema, from how films were screened to how they were marketed to it's just how they were shot. The technologies of surround sound come from him, from Star Wars. And all these technologies, the digital effects, almost every digital effects that we have now come from Star Wars, or offshoots of Star Wars. So beyond all that, there is this cultural impact and the impact on our consciousness itself. So that's kind of a starting off point. And now, if you want to open it up to questions, and we could play with it some more. And just to get a sense real quick, even though Disney was off in the last 3 films in terms of this whole structure of consciousness shift and the connection with the culture and why it triggered so much, they also were able to complete the whole 9-part trajectory in many ways. So they were able to do a lot, but they blew it in terms of a couple of foundational elements that if they had done it right, they could have really helped us right now during our cultural culture war, instead of becoming a trigger point. The 8th film became a trigger point for the culture war. Because it went from mythic to pluralistic, it basically a lot of people at the mythic structure, which is the traditional structure, which a lot of current current right-wing paradigms are operating from. And our current left-wing paradigms are operating from the pluralistic in this clash. And regrettably, Star Wars, especially that film, went right into that wound and increased polarization, regrettably, where it could have done the opposite. But Betsy, oh, I see her talking, but.
Sorry, I was just talking to my child for a second. What's up? Okay. Yes.
No, that's all right. I thought you were asking a question.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just letting my kid know she's free to walk through the room.
Okay.
But I do have a question, though.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity. What are your thoughts on things like The Mandalorian and some of the other spinoffs?
Cool. The Mandalorian is a pretty astute kind of step back. They went back into the pure mythic root. So they took Star Wars all the way back deep into the mythic structure. And in a sense, it's a spaghetti Western in space, you know. And they were smart enough to include the Force, because one of their big problems is they came out with a film on Solo that didn't have the Force in it. You can't have Star Wars without the Force. That just doesn't, it's just, you know, major blow. But so, and they, of course, whoever thought of it, the baby Yoda character was like brilliant, because it pulls the heartstrings, you know, and it connects you with that Star Wars you remember, you know, the Yoda, you know, the Yoda is kind of like he's in the Empire Strikes Back, which was the second film to be produced, which is the actual 5th film in the whole trajectory. That was the big film. That was the most successful Star Wars, and everyone, all the fans, like basically agree that it was the best. The center of that is the Force, and Yoda teaching us about the Force.
Yeah.
And to bring the Baby Yoda character back into The Mandalorian is a brilliant move to try to heal what they messed up.
That's what I was going to say. It felt like, because I did watch, my son watched The Mandalorian, and I watched some of it with him, and I did see Empire Strikes Back, but felt sort of like a reconfiguring, going back to the beginning to reintroduce some of those, because, you know, kids today, especially young ones, you know, 12 to 18, it's harder to get them to watch those older films because it's so, I mean, it's funny, it looks so old. Even, I mean, it looks like it was, my kids are like, did you make this like 500 years ago or something? You know, because it just looks so old to them. So it was great when I think that's based on what you were saying, that the Mandalorian for sure really kind of started us back at the beginning in terms of being in the mythic stage and bringing in those ideas of the Force and yeah, Baby Yoda is cute.
Yeah, and I believe one of the reasons Lucas sold to Disney is, I believe he recognized, because of his intention to keep the myth, to keep the myth alive after he's gone, he had to pass it on.
And is there a reason? I've always wondered, why did they do them out of order? Why didn't he just go one?
Right.
You know.
All right, I'll tell you the inside scoop on that.
Okay.
From George. So George, he was sitting there. He wrote the outline for all from all 9. Now, to understand this, you have to understand what he was doing was taking the work of Joseph Campbell. And he wasn't just taking these fragments from mythic films and mythic stories. He was actually trying to take a form of mythic storytelling and apply it to cinema. And it's called the ring structure. And this ring structure, we can find it as early back as in the Iliad and Homer. It's this, things go through cycles, and cycles even through generations and patterns are repeated from generation to generation. And it's this ongoing, spiraling evolutionary adventure. And so what he developed was these 3 trilogies. And part of the ring structure is each film has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it also has to have a thread, a through line going through it to the others, both before and after. And every trilogy has to have its own story thread, its own through line. And every pair has to have their own ring. And then all 9 have to have a big ring, story ring, it's called. So he picked number 4 to start because he didn't know if he would get a chance to make all 9.
Right.
And he looked at which chapter could stand on its own alone and represent the whole story world. And he looked at it and he just felt number 4 is our best shot at making a standalone that could then, if people like it, then we could make the rest of that trilogy and then head back to the prequels and then finish. So he had all this figured out, trying to, because remember, he was trying to be a cultural engineer.
Right, and 9 is the number of a cycle.
That's right.
You know, so you couldn't do 10 and you couldn't do 8. If you're going to do the whole ring, you have to do 9.
Right. And so the story, it's pretty easy for everyone to see the individual stories of the films or the individual arc of each trilogy. But then when you realize what he was doing with the ring theory, with the ring structures, 1 through 6, the first 2 trilogies, is the story of Anakin Skywalker, his evolutionary arc from little Anakin to Darth Vader to an awakened being on the other side. That's his arc. And then the arc from the second 2 trilogies, 4 through 9, is the arc of his children, Luke and Leia.
Mark, I'm struck by something that kind of fuels this arc. You said it just really briefly in your intro, but you said Lucas expanded the idea that you have to kill bad to bring about good, which definitely seems to happen in every individual installment, right? There's a big killing of the bad in order to bring about the good. Problem is, it comes back, right? The bad keeps coming back. The more you kill the bad, the bigger it gets. And then you have to have another movie, which is a nice way to sort of drive this ring cycle. But the overall spiral of it, now having watched the end of the cycle, is quite the opposite. And I think that message is very forward-looking, as was the idea of force consciousness in 1977. So
Yes.
the idea that you have to see your own darkness, to integrate it, to embrace it, to love it. And if you can do that, frankly, the entire, antagonist-protagonist storyline collapses, because there isn't any.
Yes. And that was his ultimate goal, to bring us, see, the mythic structure, one of the foundations of the mythic structure of consciousness is this polarization, us, them, right, wrong, ultimate truth or falsehood, it's this polarization. And first he took us into the myth.
Mm-hmm.
Game of Thrones did this same thing. They took us deep into the structure, so we project and identify into the mythic world. And then he takes us through it and helps us evolve through it and out of it. So that's the big trajectory. That's the trilogies, the trilogy of the trilogy. The big story is, number one, that this is a spoiler alert, so if you haven't seen the last film that's out in the theaters, close your ears or let go. But we find out that the villain in the first trilogy has been operating all this time. And he's been manipulating civilization and the world and people's consciousness all this time. And how do we break that? How do we, So it's this beautiful ring within ring within ring. And that is a mythic structure. And by holding that mythic structure and bringing us from mythic out into the next phase and holding the mythic container, he's creating a very powerful, potential, transformative process.
Absolutely. And by the way, the little, gotcha in that is that you can kill evil. You can kill it. But if you do, you just perpetuate it and become it. That's been this case with every confrontation. Complete your training, break me down.
Yeah, but he's planted the seed from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Because often the dark force people will go, yes, get angry, kill somebody, because that'll feed the darkness.
Yeah.
He puts that right up front. So already he's put in the seed of transformation. See what he did there?
And it's amazing because we can't conceive of another solution from our culture other than, kill him. That would be the end. That would fix it, and pausing that so we can then appreciate the possibility of other solutions, other plot lines arising is really powerful.
And also that relevance to today's situation, in which don't feed the darkness. The darkness is constantly calling you to feed it. And we have a lot of people today who feed that all the time. It's like, don't feed the trolls, that idea that when you feed them, you actually empower them. And unfortunately, sadly, there's a lot of people who should know better who are feeding the dark side, I would say, in this political climate.
And it's also very resonant now, because one of the major themes of Star Wars is how the darkness works hidden in the shadows, behind the scenes. And even though the first trilogy are cinematically, he kind of they're not as good as they could have been. The underlying plot, the underlying subtextual stream of that trilogy is how you undermine a democracy and have an authoritarian takeover. And all through Star Wars, we see us the rise, the different risings of authoritarianism, and us trying to then fight it and stop it, but then it keeps coming up again until we find the head. We find the wizard behind the curtain.
Mm.
You know?
Mm.
And I don't think it's a mistake that C-3PO kind of reminds us of the Tin Man. And Chewbacca can remind us of the lion.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So he's, you know, he's playing with a lot of, what he did is this is what the integral structure of consciousness does naturally. When we come from that paradigm, we seek to understand as much as we can. So we look at everything, all the different aspects as much as we can and try to integrate it into a whole picture that we could understand. So that's kind of the drive at the integral structure.
Mm.
And you could see that operating all through Star Wars and everything he's doing here. And that structure is also being communicated to us. One of the ways movies communicate to us is through what I call their cinematic consciousness. That we creators embed our consciousness into our work. Every choice we make, every idea is kind of coming through our field of consciousness. And that field of consciousness, according to Edgar Morin, who is a cultural anthropologist, sociologist, philosopher, and complex thought pioneer, he basically mapped it out that when we're creating a artifact, any artifact, especially a work of art, we are projecting ourselves into it. We are reifying what we have in our mind into a physical form. So we imagine something in our heads. That imagined world, it was born out of our field of consciousness that we're at. So it's the child of that consciousness. And we rebirth it into our artistic form. And then we, the viewer, are there looking at it and receiving this, basically, this concretized dream. And the power of it comes from the cinema, or any moving image technology, especially the more advanced ones like VR, is communicating with us the same way we dream, the same way we imagine. And because of that, our brains, as the viewer, process it as a dream. It processes it the same way as if we're having a dream. So we naturally project and identify ourselves into it. And then the creator can actually increase that potential in many ways, if we're conscious of it. And Lucas was using an advanced form of cinematic expression. And when he was talking to us, he said, if you take any class here, you have to take this class. And the following week, we all signed up for the class. And I have to tell this story. It's really the foundation of all this work. Actually, everything I'm teaching, I have Lucas to thank for. This class was taught by Lester Novros. I'm sure you've never heard of him. At the time, he was 90 years old or 80 years old. And he was an animator on the original King Kong. He was the lead animator on the Wizard's Apprentice scene from Fantasia. He was one of the special effects supervisors on 2001. And he was one of the co-inventors of IMAX technology. And he was also the keeper of a verbal tradition of cinematic storytelling going back to the Russian school with Sergei Eisenstein, which was exploring what Eisenstein called the synchronization of the senses. And it basically helps us to unpack all the expressive elements of media: light, color, rhythm, sound, music. I mean, all of these dimensions, how they speak to us, how they affect us physically, psychologically, even spiritually. And this was like a watershed moment for me, and it was a paradigm shift for me. After that first class, when he drew a square on the board, he said, this is the frame of the film, and there are every pixel, every molecule speaks to your audience, physically, emotionally, psychologically. And he went through it, and he started to do that, and he blew our minds. And I walked out of that class, and it was like, I was looking, and it was like the sun was shining, and the grass was green, and it was like, I was seeing the world for the first time. It was like how light was affecting me, how color was affecting. It was just like a total paradigm shift. And that began me on this research journey of taking that form of cinematic expression and unpacking it even further with developments in human perception and consciousness studies. And I was blessed to be trained by some of the old masters of Hollywood and some of the masters of consciousness study. And so starting to combine it, we've kind of discovered an advanced form of what Lucas has used. And that's what we're trying to share here. The structures of consciousness, we're adding the structures of consciousness to all the different elements. And that can give us more tools for us as media makers to help people evolve, especially during this time when we are in the middle of a major civilization-wide paradigm shift. We are in the middle of it. And I really believe in my heart that it's our responsibility to help us make this transition. And if you are a media maker, that means it's your responsibility to express through media any way that you could help us make the transition with as little pain and suffering as possible, because it's terrifying when your old paradigms are deconstructing around you.
Mark, I have, oh, Lynn, go ahead. We've been noisy on this side.
We can't hear you, Lynn. You have to.
Right. Hopefully mine will be pretty short. Could you say again something about the clash that came in the Star Wars trilogy or the Star Wars world about the pluralistic meeting a prior stage of development?
Yes. Okay. So the mythic structure is where Star Wars started. The light and dark, the fight between light and darkness, right and wrong, right? And that is the mythic structure. He uses myths, so it was like really the mythic structure. And the Force was like this, this God in a way, the spirit, and that is all part of the mythic structure. The next stage of development is the rational structure. Mm-hmm. When we shift into more frames of equality and more into objective truth, mm-hmm. instead of absolute truth, which is the mythic structure believes in absolute truths.
Yeah.
My truth is the truth, yours is not. Where we get into the rational, there's a shift in terms of, well, what is verifiable truth? What is objective truth? Yeah. What can we verify? Mm-hmm. But what they did, which was a great important shift for us, and the technologies from that paradigm have been amazing and have brought us to this incredible place. But every stage has its weaknesses, its blind spots. And regrettably, we got those too. And so that's one of those weaknesses is you have to kill God in order to be a true empiricist. And that makes the transition harder. But you still, and the pluralistic is the one after the rational, right. Which is we say, wait a minute, everything is not just verifiable external objects. I'm not an object, my consciousness is not an object, my feelings is not a physical object, but I have them.
Yeah.
And they're real. That's when that structure starts coming in, and then that structure starts to understand that that there are relative truths. So that's kind of the basic. And what happened is this, Lucas had designed for the final trilogy, at least for the whole or at some part, for us to awaken to the Force as a scientific phenomena. Mm. And then after that, he would introduce, but there's even more beyond that scientific phenomena.
Yeah, yeah.
But they skipped that stage. And you can't skip a stage of development. And because this story world is so rooted in our cultural development, it was like throwing a wrench into our evolutionary system.
So that's where we are now?
Well, they tried to fix it. They tried to go back and fix it, but they still have not fixed that hole. If I was talking to Disney, I would say, you also got to make a series or do something where you get into the metachlorians. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Midichlorians?
Midichlorian. Which Lucas imagined they were kind of like this subatomic network of kind of like he based it on the Mycenaean network. Mycenaean? Which in... Mycelium network.
Mycelium, oh, okay.
That the underlying source of the Force is this underlying mycelium network that exists in all dimensions of time and space. And you even kind of like are seeing, it's funny, but the Star Trek universe is playing with a similar thing in Star Trek Discovery now. But the Star Wars universe skipped it. And Lucas was the first one to try to do it. But they threw out his idea because I don't think they realized the importance of it, that stage.
So can you say one phrase, what is that stage that he skipped?
The rational.
he skipped the rational.
In terms of the whole kind of foundation of the story world, it's you've got the Force in its mythic form. And then they brought us into the end, which is the Force as this transcendent,
Okay.
pluralistic, transpersonal kind of form that transcends all boundaries. But you're missing a stage there. You can't go from absolute truth to transcendent truth without going through the objective truth. You just can't do it.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, we might want to mention too that because most film critics are pluralistic and a lot of the audience that is most vocal are pluralistic, a lot of them didn't have a problem with that number 8, the film that was so problematic. So that's why there's this clash, because there are a lot of people who said, oh, he's wonderful, he broke us out of this terrible mythic world and advanced us and did all these great things, because pluralistic people are already there. So they're not bothered when you violate the mythic constructs of the world. And then they got upset with the last film because it went back to that. They said, well, Rian Johnson set us free of all that. How come J.J. Abrams is bringing us back into that? Whereas to people who were at Mythic, they hated number 8. A lot of them, friends of mine, were, oh, it's terrible. I thought there was a lot that was beautiful in it, but it wasn't that accessible to a lot of people, obviously. You could see it made a major miscalculation, as Mark said, by trying to go too far, too fast.
So interesting. Thank you.
Now, wait, now, it's even more nuanced than that, because even people at the rational, and don't forget, even when we're at pluralistic, all the structures still exist inside of us. We transcend and include them.
Right.
So we're all attracted to mythic stories.
Yeah.
But the mythic paradigms change. So it's like the mythic paradigm of black and white polarization, that has to shift away. But a mythic story of the hero's quest is universal throughout the structures. That kind of holds, So we could still tell a pluralistic story within a pluralistic, within a mythic story stream and be okay. But once we start getting into the mythic paradigms, like absolute truth, or black and white without any shades of gray, that's when, so that's where the trouble lies. And, and because we are in the middle of this paradigm shift ourselves. And one of the things is when there's a major civilization-wide paradigm shift, which I think the last big one was the Industrial Revolution. Mm. When these big shifts happen, a large percentage of the population tends to recoil in fear.
Oh, yeah.
And we revert back to the most stable structure of consciousness inside of us. And that, regrettably, is the mythic structure right now. Because remember, the mythic structure developed over thousands of years. The Industrial Revolution is only a few centuries old. And the information age, which is the next level, which is pluralistic, is less than a century old. And the integral structure has been emerging kind of sporadically, but only within the last 10 years. Actually, within the last almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
The integral has been infiltrating the cinema. At least we could say that now we have a lot of integral filmmakers operating. J.J. Abrams, Christopher Nolan, Ava DuVernay. We have a lot of integral media makers operating there that are trying to uplift us. And we're seeing a lot of attempts now at helping us through the transition, either consciously or unconsciously. You have series like Messiah on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
and The Expanse on, wait, I'm sorry, The Messiah is on Netflix, The Expanse is on Amazon. Both of these are targeting civilization-wide paradigm shifts specifically, which is pretty cool to watch.
I'm curious your thoughts on Sense8 and Babylon 5. You know, Michael Krasinski.
Sense8 is advanced integral filmmaking by filmmakers who've studied integral theory. They've studied with Ken Wilber. They're pals.
What's it called?
Sense8.
The word sense and the number 8.
It's a streaming series on Netflix. It's major. It's groundbreaking by the makers of The Matrix. And if everyone wants to know, The Matrix was an integral work by integral filmmakers. So,
and the Wachowskis were both men when they made The Matrix, and they're now both women. So Sense8 is actually integrating masculine and feminine in very advanced ways as well. That's one of the things it's targeting.
And if you look at the paradigm shift that we have, I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I was also going to say the other point Mark has made is that film critics and theorists, by and large, have not kept up with this evolution in the cinema. So very few people saw what Sense8 was doing. Very few people have seen anything that Messiah is doing. They don't understand it. And yet if you look from this new perspective, you can see that these are works that are consciously designed to try to bring an audience through these structures and evolve them. And it's absolutely clear once you know it's there. So Messiah, Sense8.
Huh.
I have a question. It's kind of it's more since I wanted to ask it the first time, which is great. Pausing gives you more insight. Mark, you spoke to the paradigm shift that we're in now, and you earlier spoke to like the call to media makers to help with the paradigm shift, essentially. And then you talked about going, when we're in a paradigm shift, we go back to the most stable structure, which in this case is the mythic. I don't really know quite the question, but I'm groping as I'm speaking it. It's like, do you have to then, how does the storytelling of today have to now shift because we've reverted, or the masses have reverted back to that structure? And it doesn't.
Not all of the masses. There's a lot of people also at the pluralistic. And
no, I get that. Yeah, I don't think it's everybody, but just in terms of if you're trying to have a film like, Star Wars again, that's going to hit the masses. Yeah. You have to tell it in a different way.
Yeah. What we see now is what filmmakers are doing. A great example is Black Panther, which we've talked about here. That represents this new way of reaching us, because what's going on here is because of the internet and smartphones, and our technologies are advancing at an accelerated pace way beyond our collective consciousnesses. The center of gravity of our collective consciousness. It's basically, there's technologies coming online that are 4 stages ahead of mythic. All right? Our civilizational structures are stuck at rational industrial. Our economic systems are trying to go global, but they're trying to adapt rational industrial structures to the new global technology frameworks. And so these advanced technologies are shifting our paradigm. It's like, for example, global scale technologies create global scale problems. But if you're not operating at a global centric consciousness, you can't fix those. This is what Einstein said a long time ago. You can't fix a problem from the structure of consciousness that created it. So we've got technologies creating technologies 2, 3, 4 stages ahead of us our center of gravity, creating problems at all those stages. And so this paradigm shift is not as clean as the Industrial Revolution was.
Yeah.
This is 3D chess.
That's funny.
The Industrial Revolution was checkers. And what we're in is 3D chess.
Yeah.
So what the filmmakers are doing now,
a
real quick, I just want to answer a question, Betsy. Real quick, what the new filmmakers are doing, these filmmakers, is they're trying to integrate all the structures so you could plug in where you are
Yeah.
and head on the evolutionary stream.
Yeah.
Because we're in this cauldron of, we have access, our kids have access to all the structures, all the world's knowledge, all the structures of consciousness at once. So these filmmakers are experimenting with these new ways of trying to communicate multiple structures and taking us from where we plug into it across into the next stage. So in Black Panther, you have characters that are at the crossroads of all three, shifting. So if I'm plugged into this character at the mythic, I can follow him to shift into rational. If I'm projecting and identifying with the rational character, once I'm projected and identified, I could follow them through their transition.
Mm-hmm.
So you see what's happening?
Yeah. What is it? Ken Wilber's Ladder Climber Review? It sounds like putting that into a movie.
Yeah. Or his idea of the evolutionary conveyor belt.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
Yes, Betsy.
Scientist once, a couple of things. It's interesting because I interviewed the scientist once, and he basically said exactly what you said in a different way. He's like, we come up with a theory, and then we prove it right, and then it goes wrong, but we haven't figured out what to do with it because we don't have the technology or the information to deal with what went wrong because we didn't know what was going to go wrong. So then we got to, it's this constant. And I thought about it in terms of like education. You know, you're talking about how kids have all this stuff integrated, and the education system just doesn't serve them anymore because it's really difficult. We have this massive systems that just, they can't, they're not flexible enough or limber enough to shift and change with the rapid change that's happening. So they, you know, kids go to school and they're like, why am I being forced into this box when I'm like out here? And so it's pretty fascinating.
Absolutely, Betsy. You're right on target here. Right on. It's like, especially the educational and social systems, you know, in the Western world. It's like you can see the rational industrial structure there. It's like if you don't fit into box A, B, C, or D, you don't exist.
Well, and the industrial structure is not that old. So like, you know, they don't even, they can't even, they're trying to sort of like stopgap, you know, like they'll try to use technology, but they're just, it's sort of not really working very well. I just want to do one quick plug for anybody here. At the Conscious Creators Network, we do have courses coming up that are really cool. We have a screenwriting course. We have a course on, I'm going to do a documentary filmmaking masterclass course. Mark is going to do a course at the second half of the year. So you guys should check out some of our courses on filmmaking, because we are going to be talking about a lot of what Mark is talking about here, but taking it down to the sort of practical level of, okay, how do I actually do this and make a movie? So just as a plug.
So any other questions? I know we're over our time, but I'm here if you want to keep going at least to 2:30, and then I have to leave. But so floor is open.
Well, I'll bring something up again. This is so illuminating for me. I am not a Star Wars fan, and this has helped me see why I need to be, because I grew up in a very rational engineering military structured family, and I think I was in nursing school when it came out. I remember it, and I was turned off because it was not real. It was not objective. And what is my life missing? Myth. It's like Joseph Campbell really speaks to me. So what I'm curious about is what I see happening in, say, I'm involved in a Renzai Zen world that's very integrally informed. And I see this mythic structure, this mythic urge coming up with all these men who are in this Jordan Peterson dark web. And it's like, wow, where's this coming from? This is like, they are rejecting the feminine, and they're losing women left and right, because I'm one of the last women in there because I grew up with Marines, right? So I'm not scared by it, but it's like, that can't be the transcend and include from the pluralistic phase.
No, but
okay, tell me.
Here's the secret here. As we enter this kind of major evolutionary transition, we're being asked to go from one state, one structure of consciousness to a new structure.
Yeah.
The old structure has to fall apart.
Yes.
Which is what it's doing, obviously. That's pretty clear for everybody.
Yeah, I get that.
But hey,
okay.
But the beauty of this journey we're on is that everything that's falling apart is revealing our collective shadow material that we have to deal with before we make it to the other side.
Yes.
We cannot make the shift and hold on to that polarization structure anymore.
Yeah.
This is why this is such a huge, hard shift. Because the polarization, the duality tendency in human consciousness goes back, it's primal.
Mm-hmm.
And we are entering the first transition to try to move out of that on a collective scale.
Is that second tier? Is that what that is?
Second tier. No. We're going, no, it's pluralistic.
Okay, that's just pluralistic. Okay, all right.
Pluralistic in terms of, okay, wait, here it is. It's not so simple. The pluralistic people, their edge is going towards integral.
Okay.
But our structures of society that are stuck in rational industrial, they have to get into pluralistic.
Okay.
Which is global centric, decentralized systems. Now, what Betsy was bringing up is that this centralized industrial educational system or social system no longer functions because we are in a global, transformative, technological reality at the same time. So it's just, it doesn't fit. And our kids are there. If you ever watch kids collectively playing, what's it called? The game that Daniel plays all the time.
Fortnite?
Jonathan? Huh?
Minecraft.
Yeah, Minecraft. I was going to say either Minecraft or Fortnite.
All right. You watch them do Minecraft. All right. And I was watching this, and like, there's these kids, and they form this collective, kids all around the globe, and they're working as a team, creating a civilization. And they're able to not only multitask, but multi-communicate. It's almost like we're witnessing the birth of a different form of collective intelligence. I can't hear you, Betsy.
The worlds are multidimensional. Like if you look at the worlds that they're building, they're fully like integral. Like this, the way that it's kind of, I love watching them do Minecraft. Yeah. It's really unbelievable to see. Like I look at it and go, this just makes such perfect sense. So we have this
problem with, they're about 2 stages ahead of their educational structure. So of course they're like looking at it going, I mean, it's just not functioning for them.
In that scenario where essentially the theme here is that the younger generations are being led by the media and by technology, a couple of steps past the infrastructure of society, it feels to me like the solution to that is just to allow society's institutions to crumble, and then the next generation just will create something that is appropriate to their level of conscious evolution. And does that happen in a smooth way?
That's up to us.
You should
That's
read
up to
Irvin
us.
Laszlo. You should read some Irvin Laszlo. He talks a lot about how systems die and new systems rebirth.
But
And
no matter what, this old system is not going to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our choice how we go through that deconstruction. And what Buckminster talks about is during this type of transition, fighting the system or trying to fix the system is kind of like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You have to invent a new system, discover what the new paradigm is, and create a function out of that that is so superior to the old system that people just want it more than the other. That is our hope and chance. So if we could shift enough people, so what we're looking at now is we're trying to train as many media makers and normal everyday people, because like it or not, media is everywhere. And by learning how media affects us, we as a viewer become inoculated to the mass programming that has been happening. Remember, for a culture to be stable, it programs its members.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not using the programming as like this, Big Brother thing. It is kind of part of the system itself. The systems seek stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that stabilization is making sure that everyone is raised in its paradigm. And then we raise in that paradigm, we create works of art that are resonant with the paradigm that we're in. So we're all kind of helping each other stay in this paradigm. But if some of us start to wake up from the matrix and start saying, wait, here's the tools for paradigm shifting, and it's in our hands now. It's in everyone's hands now.
Yeah.
I believe that's our best shot, because media is our main form of communication, what we're doing right now. This is, and the culture war is totally being fueled and happening because of media.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we have a president who's using an advanced pluralistic technology to deconstruct the pluralistic paradigms that have been, they see as infecting our structure of society.
Hmm.
So, it's like this when what's happened in human history is these transitions have not been painless, to say the least. And this gap between our technology and our structures of consciousness is the root cause, I believe, of almost every major genocide humanity has committed against itself. Because you see this story after story. Take World War II. You have a tribal mythic consciousness get their hands on rational industrial war technologies. And they used it to create factories of extinction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it behooves us to heal the gap. And I believe the only way to heal the gap is to use those advanced technologies, these media technologies that we have, to help accelerate our own evolution. And I believe it's possible, and Star Wars is an example of the possibility that any one of us could have that kind of an effect. Because it wasn't a big budget film. It was just, these young filmmakers, trying to make this film, and his intention was there. So we could intend to do this and successfully do it. It's not easy.
Mark, this may be a question that takes us to maybe another conversation or topic, but just remember as a seed if it's not appropriate for here. We're talking about telling the story of essentially human evolution, right? On sort of the positive trajectory. There's also the other story of preparing for what's coming, and the pain that I get emotional, just preparing for that and like helping everybody along the spiral be ready as best as we can be for what is.
Shadow work's important. That's what we were talking about. You have to do shadow work, and that, you're right.
And so I'm wondering, like, I don't know the right question, but it's like, who out there is telling that story along the spiral, or how do we tell that story? It's a big question, but it's where my heart is going at.
Yeah. We could go into that. There are filmmakers trying to help us do shadow work, definitely.
Oh, who? That sounds good.
We'll have a whole thing on that, because that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, well,
shadow work.
I knew it wasn't
that's like
quite so simple, but
you've opened up a big.
I know.
It's like,
the show Messiah, I think, is actually kind of addressing that directly. It's targeting that in a lot of ways.
It is.
Different layers of shadow work among different structures.
Mm-hmm.
I have another thought question, maybe just to leave with, and maybe it's another topic, but you mentioned Trump and rallies and tweeting in his media as shoring up the reversion to the previous paradigm, which he's consciously doing. My question is, and this is maybe, I don't know, is it actually possible to do that? Or does all of Trump's rhetoric and media thing, does it land on the culture that has already moved on in a way that it doesn't actually degrade or diminish? In fact, it strengthens by showing the opposite. In other words, is it shadow work for society?
Yes. Everything we're seeing is shadow work for us. So
it makes us stronger.
We need, in a way, this is what had to happen.
Yeah.
We had to have seen, in a way, at least here in the United States, what's happening with Trump is the reversion of the mythic is there, but also he represents the shadow of the American culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
like
when
that elevation of prophet among the prophet as God.
Yeah, that's what we're
And he is the poster child for that.
Mm-hmm.
and
He is the shadow. He is our shadow coming to say, hey man.
just to tie it up then, episode 9 was all about that.
Yes.
It's about seeing your demonic self and recognizing that your fear of that is actually what is perpetuating the conflict in your life and in the universe, galaxy in this case. And when you see that that's happening, then something else is possible.
Yes. Now, this is a great place for us to end, because I want to say this. One of the keys to shifting structures of consciousness, shifting a paradigm, is what we call a shift from subject to object. The old paradigm has to become an object in our awareness. We have to see it. I'm in a paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
We can't wake up. We can't make a shift unless we know that we're in a paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
So that the first step is recognizing, oh, I am in a paradigm. The second I realize that, the transcend and include process has begun.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like if you're a fish that doesn't know they're in the ocean, I mean, what do you mean ocean? What are you talking about?
What water?
What water? What are you talking about? But the second they pop their head up and they see, oh my God, I'm in this big thing. There's the paradigm shift. So the paradigm shift itself is recognizing we're in a paradigm. The second it becomes an object in our awareness, it's no longer controlling us.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the key things we can do as media makers is to help people wake up to the paradigm that they're in.
Yeah. Right.
And that is easier than throwing them into a paradigm that they have no idea what it is. You can't. You can't do that.
Your question.
Yeah, exactly. And that, yeah.
So you have to first resonate with them in their paradigm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then gradually take them out. What Disney did was went from one paradigm, skipped the paradigm, and went to another paradigm.
Okay.
And we can't. It just doesn't work. So.
Mark, before we just leave, I just wanted to express my appreciation for the space, for you, for your teachings. I'm not a media maker, although I, by osmosis, am affected and impacted, and you really dropped in a lot of color to my lens of perception around media and technology. And yeah, it was very expanding. And just to get a sense of who you are and some of the stories was really great. I work with Eric and David and Ronit. So this was a real gift on a Saturday. Thank you.
I don't know if you know if you saw my note, but Ronit said hi and sends her regrets. She's unfortunately on the way to the airport, or she would have been here too.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's great having you guys here.
Yeah.
And everyone, thank you for being here.
Mark, it was amazing. Bye, everybody. I gotta go. Mwah. Bye.
May the
Thank you.
force be with
Thanks
us.
again.
Yeah.